The Yoon administration has pitched the smallest spending increase in nearly 2 decades for next year's budget, as it doubles down on fiscal soundness compared to a previous expansionary stance. Despite the belt tightening, South Korea's financing for ODA projects has hit a fresh high, and that for helping Ukraine has increased eightfold. Military spending is also going up to bolster the Korean three-axis defense system, among others. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is railing against the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan taking aim at the three nations' joint drills. It's August 29, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We begin this evening with the budget proposed by the Yoon administration for next year. The government has kept the spending increase at the lowest level in almost 2 decades. This as the nation continues to tighten its belt and shifts away from previous expansionary stance, while promising to spend more for marginalized people. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young joins me in the studio. Welcome, Ha-young.
Good evening, Jung-min.
So, Ha-young, the government's budget proposal for 2024, what were the major shifts and takeaways?
Well, Jung-min, for this year's budget, Yoon administration focused on building a solid foundation for physical soundness. And while continuing with this theme for next year's budget as well, it has also focused on improving the country's financial structure. Let's take a listen.
우리 정부는 경제 체질을 시장 중심 민간 주도로 바꿔 민간이 더 활발하게 투자하고 지출하고 일자리를 만들어내는데 역점을 둘 것입니다. 이를 위해 민간 투자를 저해하는 킬러 규제를 과감하게 철폐하고 민간의 자금이 흘러갈 수 있도록 금융 시스템을 정비할 것입니다.
In order to do so, South Korea will continue to tighten its belt. The government on Tuesday proposed a budget bill for next year of 656.9 trillion Korean won, or around 495 billion US dollars at the current rate. And it's an increase of 2.8% from this year's budget, the smallest on-year increase since top-down budgeting was first introduced in 2005. And also, the government has gone through major spending reforms in order to secure an extra $17 billion of funds for use in the budget. Seoul's finance ministry said the newly secured funds will be used to stabilize people's livelihoods and for public safety.
No matter how difficult the financial conditions may be, investing in areas such as protecting the socially vulnerable, ensuring public safety, and preparing for a better future cannot be neglected.
Then, Ha-young, what does the government have in mind as key priorities for next year's budget?
Well, Jung-min, the centerpiece of the bill is some $14.6 billion allocated to bolster the welfare system for the socially vulnerable. This includes increasing the maximum basic living allowance for low-income families to approximately $1,400 per month. And that's $160 more compared to this year and more than the total increase implemented by the previous administration. And as a response to the aging society issue, the government has increased the number of jobs for senior citizens to 1 million, which is approximately 10% of their elderly population, and marks a record high increase of 147,000. And it has also increased senior employment allowance by 7%. Those allowances have been frozen since 2018. And the budget bill will also be used to provide counseling and training to motivate and encourage the so-called NEET tribe in South Korea. NEET is an acronym for Not Currently Engaged in Education, Employment, or Training. And it is also planning to introduce a transportation card called K-Pass in July next year, which will reduce the burden of transit expenses for young people by 30% or more than $245 per year. And the Yoon administration will also spend some of the budget on dealing with the country's low birth rate. Under the 2024 budget, parents with newborns will be eligible for up to 1 million won, or around $750 per month in parental allowance beginning next year. And also to achieve a balance between work and childcare, the period of paid childcare leave, in this case for both maternity and paternity leave, will be extended for the first time since 1995 from 12 months to 18 months.
And are there any new changes that Korean business and industry should pay attention to? And also, what's in store for next year's tax revenue?
Well, financial support for AI, biotech, and cybersecurity, and as well as South Korea's digital platform government, which connects data across the private and public sectors, will be expanded from the current $2.7 billion to $3.3 billion to help advance the service industry. And also, in terms of cultural content exports and securing intellectual property rights, the government will be investing more than twice as much compared to this year. Take a listen.
Amid the heating up of OTT platform competition around the world, to promote cultural content exports and secure intellectual property rights, we'll expand policy financing from 800 billion won to 1.8 trillion won, more than double, by establishing a new K-Content Strategic Fund.
Meanwhile, the budget has been designed to manage the increase in government debt by reducing expenditure growth.
Despite a decline in tax revenue, we mitigated the deterioration of the fiscal balance for the upcoming year by curbing the growth rate of total expenditure. We have also managed to control the increase in national debt, keeping it at its lowest level since 2019 at 61.8 trillion won, as part of efforts to establish a solid foundation for fiscal soundness.
And following a decline in national tax revenue, the figure for next year is projected to be roughly $278 billion, down 8% from this year. And the amount in tax exemption is expected to be increased by $5.7 billion from this year to a record high of $58 billion. And so falling tax revenue and rising tax exemptions have resulted in a tax exemption rate of 16.3%, which exceeds the legal limit by 2.3 percentage points. And that's the largest difference ever. And with next year's budget, South Korea's budget deficit to GDP ratio is forecast to be at 1.9%, worsening by 1.3 percentage points from this year. The total national debt to GDP ratio is expected to be 51% next year, up 0.6 percentage points from this year. And the government now plans to submit the final bill to the National Assembly on September 1st, and the legal deadline for National Assembly to pass the budget is December 2nd.
All right, thanks for your reporting, Hayoung.
Always my pleasure.
And despite the belt tightening, South Korea has set aside a record high amount for official development assistance in line with its global pivotal state policy. Military spending is also set to go up to counter North Korea's nuclear and missile aggression. For more, here is our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae Eun-ji.
South Korea has tentatively allocated its largest ever budget for official development assistance, or government aid designed to promote the economic development and welfare of other countries. Stressing the country's growing role in the global community, President Yoon said Tuesday that the government plans to raise the ODA budget next year to 6.5 trillion Korean won, or roughly $4.9 billion.
글로벌 중추국가로서 국제사회에 대한 책임 있는 역할과 기여도 확대해야 합니다. 우크라이나 재건 지원 ODA 예산을 5배 이상 확대하고 디지털 분야 ODA를 대폭 늘리겠습니다.
Of the total ODA budget, nearly $400 million will be used to support Ukraine, which is 8 times higher than last year. It will spend $196 million to provide medical supplies, humanitarian aid, and around $98 million for reconstruction projects. And another $98 million will be given to help Ukraine through international agencies. As for next year's defense budget, the country has announced a plan to increase it by 4.5%, focusing on strengthening its capabilities to counter North Korea's nuclear missile threats. The Defense Ministry said Tuesday that it'll submit a budget proposal of about $45 billion to the National Assembly on Friday for approval. It seeks to spend around $13.5 billion to bolster defense capabilities, 5.2% higher compared to the year before. This includes building a combined combat system using both manned and unmanned assets, as well as developing the country's so-called three-axis defense system, a scheme to counter North Korea's nuclear missile threats. The first axis is to preemptively strike North Korea's nuclear missile sites when there are signs of an imminent attack targeting South Korea. If that fails, it moves on to the second axis, intercepting launched missiles using a multi-layered missile defense system. And finally, the third axis, mass retaliation against North Korea following an attack on the South. The ministry also set aside $31 billion to run its military forces, an increase of 5.8% on year. Meanwhile, the government decided to cut next year's budget for the Unification Ministry by more than 20%. Hyun, Arirang News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is railing against the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, prompting criticism from the Seoul government. What's also unusual is Kim calling the South by its official name, something taken as a show of hostility. Or Lee Dae-hyun explains.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un criticized the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan for their plans for trilateral joint military drills. According to the regime state-run media on Tuesday, Kim Jong-un marked the Day of Navy by inspecting the naval headquarters near Pyongyang with his daughter. Now, this was the first time that Kim Jong-un has visited the naval headquarters for the Day of Navy since he took power in 2012. In a ceremonial speech there, Kim mentioned the Camp David Trilateral Summit, where Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo pledged to regularize joint military exercises. He also called the Korean Peninsula the, quote, most dangerous zone for nuclear war, citing Washington's deployment of strategic assets in the South. During the speech, Kim referred to South Korea by using the country's full name, the Republic of Korea, for the first time. Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un, used the full name earlier last month. One expert says this shows the North's stronger stance towards South Korea.
This shows how the North will now consider the South as external relations, not as one people. No flexibility will be applied in Seoul-Pyongyang relations anymore, which is a hardline on Seoul.
One official from South Korea's Unification Ministry assessed this as Pyongyang expressing its sense of crisis amid strengthened security ties between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. The official also said that the North must know that its missile provocations are the cause of the stronger ties, adding that Pyongyang should focus on its public welfare instead of preparing for war. In fact, in international waters south of the Korean Peninsula on Tuesday, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan staged a trilateral missile defense exercise. The Navy said that the exercise focused on mastering the response procedures, which is to detect and track a computer-simulated target and share related information. An inspection of sharing missile warning data in real time between the three nations was also conducted. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
At the United Nations, South Korea, the U.S. and Japan have reiterated their rebuke of North Korea's most recent satellite attempt, denouncing the regime's violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. Lee Seung-jae has more.
During a meeting of the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group for Space Security held at the UN office in Geneva on Monday, a number of countries, including South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, condemned North Korea's recent attempt at launching a military reconnaissance satellite. Speaking at the meeting, Park Eun-jin, South Korea's Director of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said that attempts made by the North to send a military spy satellite using ballistic missile technology are illegal, stressing that Pyongyang is getting closer to achieving its goal of advancing the necessary technology. Japan's representative also slammed the recent launch, saying that it goes against UN Security Council resolutions and poses a serious threat to countries in the region. However, North Korea's permanent representative to the United Nations Secretariat in Geneva, Han Dae-sung, argued that UN Security Council resolutions are illegal documents that violate the UN Charter and that Pyongyang will not be bound by such resolutions led by the United States and its allies. Han continued to argue that other countries have also launched satellites, with South Korea and the U.S. constantly conducting joint military drills. Such launches are self-defense measures directly related to guaranteeing the safety of the country. The U.S. quickly responded by saying that while the joint drills are defensive in nature, the North's ballistic missile launches are not. The UN Open-Ended Working Group for Space Security is a working-level consultative body established by the UN General Assembly to create responsible norms of conduct, and comes after North Korea conducted its second attempt to send a military spy satellite into orbit, which failed last Thursday. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Special forces from South Korea and the United States have been out in the ocean for the past couple of days to master techniques for maritime infiltration infiltration. It's among the dozens of field training as part of the ongoing HYBE Freedom Shield exercise. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung takes us there.
Special Operations Forces from South Korea and the U.S. head toward the shore on rubber boats, keeping their positions low. A number of the Special Forces personnel swim the rest of the way, cautiously making sure it's safe for the rest of the team to arrive. This is a glimpse of the combined training that Seoul and Washington do on a daily basis to infiltrate the enemy's base. Since last week in Yangyang County, Gangwon-do Province, around 100 personnel from South Korea's Army and U.S. Special Operations Command Korea have been conducting field training exercises to enhance skills in maritime infiltration. The training is part of the HYBE Freedom Shield exercise, which runs until Thursday. This combined special operation is aimed at strengthening Seoul and Washington's interoperability.
Combined special operations capabilities could be further strengthened by mastering various tasks with the U.S. Special Operations Command Korea. We will continue to train and establish a perfect readiness so that we can accomplish any mission in case of emergency.
Seoul and Washington Special Forces master maritime infiltration techniques, including special strike operations and close combat techniques. The U.S. Captain Jay said the training is also focused on building the skills of leaders at every level, noting it as being the most important resource. He also underlined strong teamwork with South Korean forces.
For 70 years, American and Korean soldiers have stood shoulder to shoulder, dedicated to the defense of our homelands. Our ironclad alliance is integrated at every level, from the strategic to the tactical. I am proud to work with my Korean brothers. 같이 갑시다, 필승.
Going forward, Seoul and Washington Special Forces vow to prepare for every scenario on air, land, and sea.
U.S. Korea! We are together!
Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol declared 3 additional regions as special disaster zones on Tuesday in an effort to swiftly recover from the aftermath of Typhoon Khanun. Goseong-gun County of Gangwon-do Province, part of Gyeongju City, and Chilgok-gun County in Gyeongsangbuk-do Province are now eligible for the government's financial support for recovery work, as well as relief funds for victims and other benefits. 2 other regions, Daegu's Gunwi-gun County and a different part of Goseong-gun County, were named as special disaster zones 2 weeks ago. With this new announcement, all of Goseong-gun County is a special disaster zone. The top office says the decision was based on a detailed joint investigation by relevant ministries regarding the typhoon damage. Earlier today, the ruling People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party ended their respective 2-day workshops, making resolutions that will hopefully lead them towards accomplishments in the upcoming regular National Assembly sessions, as well as setting themselves up for next year's general election. Our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo reports.
Rival lawmakers of the ruling People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party each adopted and publicized new sets of resolutions on Tuesday at the closing of their respective 2-day workshops. The PPP representatives who met in the city of Incheon vowed to take 3 specific actions. They are confronting political provocations while refraining from political strife and prioritizing the livelihood of the public, committing to engage in productive legislative action to foster the country's economic growth, and working together with the government to push for reform in the pension, labor, and education sectors and successfully carrying out national tasks. PPP leader Kim Ki-yeon urged his members to move forward with strong determination, saying that the party was at the starting line of a journey toward victory. The DP gathering in the city of Wonju in Gangwon-do Province also made public its resolution containing 8 promises to the people to improve their livelihoods. They included the DP's determination to keep on protesting against the Fukushima wastewater release, protect the general public against violent crimes, and demand thorough investigations of the Jamboree fiasco and the Osong underwater tunnel disaster, as well as to improve the economy. The DP leader Lee Jae-myung said it was necessary to come up with measures for the recovery of people's livelihood while demanding thorough investigations of the Jamboree and tunnel disaster. The workshops come just ahead of the last regular session of the 21st National Assembly prior to next year's general election. The 100-day assembly session is set to begin on September 1st. And this will be some members of the rival parties' last chance to push for and pass long-awaited pending bills. 이시후, Arirang News.
South Korea's export value index fell year-on-year for the 10th consecutive month in July due to a drop in semiconductor prices. Data released by the Bank of Korea on Tuesday showed the index decreased by 15.8% compared to last year, with more than a 30% drop in semiconductor prices. However, the net terms of trade index has been recovering since June due to a bigger decline in import costs than export prices. Specifically, this was caused by larger base effects from international oil prices in the first half of 2023 compared to a year ago. South Korea will raise the spending limit on holiday gifts for public officials in a bid to boost the domestic economy and business for local producers. Anti-Corruption Commissioner Kim Hong-il says the revision to the country's draft law will take effect from Wednesday, with spending on agricultural and fishery products to rise from 100,000 won to 150,000 won, or roughly 75 to 110 US dollars. The range of gifts for civil servants up to 50,000 won will expand to include gift certificates for food or cultural products and services, with the exception of vouchers that can be converted into cash. Ahead of the Chuseok Thanksgiving holiday, the limit for agricultural and fishery items will be raised from 200,000 won to 300,000 on agricultural and fishery products, or roughly $150 to $225. The special spending limit will apply from September 5th to October 4th. HYBE, the agency behind BTS, announced on Monday at a press conference in Los Angeles the final 20 contestants who will compete in a global girl group audition program. Called the Debut Dream Academy, the audition program is led by HYBE's chairman Bang Si-hyuk in partnership with major U.S. record label Geffen Records, with the aim of forming an international girl group based on K-pop methodology. Chosen out of 120,000 participants, the finalists from 12 countries have been training for over a year in the U.S., and their audition process for the next 12 weeks will be shared on YouTube and other platforms starting September 1st.
A low-pressure system moving across the country will bring showers until tomorrow. If you take a look at the radar, the red region indicates relatively stronger rain clouds. Heavy rain is currently pounding central regions and parts of the south coast. By tomorrow morning, heavier showers will be concentrated across the south of the country. As for the overall amount of rainfall, the coastlines of Gyeongsang-namdo province will see severe downpours of up to 200 millimeters. For Jeollanam-do and the remainder of Gyeongsang-do province will see up to 150 millimeters. Central regions, including the Samich-Poton area, will see 30 to 80 millimeters. Gusty winds will also sweep across the coastlines. For all coastal regions surrounding the peninsula, winds will be gusting as fast as 15 meters per second. High waves are also expected, so please stay away from breakwaters or piers. Wet morning will prevail nationwide. Seoul will start off at 22 degrees Celsius tomorrow. Daytime highs in Seoul will get up to 26, Daejeon 25. Gyeongju and Busan will be topping out at 30 degrees. And southern regions will see frequent showers for the remainder of the week. On Sunday, another round of nationwide rain is in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
입니다. 항공 스탠바이. 항공 스타트.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Today, August 29th, marks International Day Against Nuclear Tests, aiming to raise awareness about the effects of nuclear weapons testing and make a nuclear weapons-free world. Ever since the U.S. conducted the first nuclear test explosion at Los Alamos, New Mexico, the atomic age began. A lot of efforts have been made to reduce nuclear danger, including coming up with treaties such as the NPT, New START Agreement, and CTBT. However, the world is still witnessing nuclear arsenals actually being upgraded rather than nuclear disarmament. Marking this very day, Within the Frame would like to talk about efforts that have been made up till now, the status quo, and the direction to go for a nuclear-safe future. And for this, we invite Elena Zakova, Executive Director at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Welcome, Director Zakova.
Thank you for having me. Welcome to the viewers.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Professor Kim Young-jun from the Korea National Defense University. Good to see you, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, first question to our Director Zakova. So, ever since the Trinity test and the nuclear weapons were made, many international treaties to ban nuclear testing and reduce the nuclear danger have been made. What were they?
Well, it was very clear after the first use of nuclear weapons that it is a dangerous and inhumane weapon. And if you think about the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, their yield was relatively low compared to the more modern weapons. However, it took so many years of testing, including an enormously powerful nuclear weapons, and also a Cuban Missile Crisis, before countries agreed to at least to prohibit testing, partial testing of nuclear weapons. In 1963, the Treaty on the Partial Nuclear Test Ban was negotiated, and nuclear testing was prohibited in the atmosphere, in the outer space, and underwater. However, underground testing still remained. And in between 1945 and until 1996, when the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was negotiated, more than 2,000 nuclear tests were performed. More precisely, 2,047. That is, if you count it, it's one nuclear test every 9 days. So only in 1996, countries were able to negotiate a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. And that prohibited nuclear testing in all, both the partial already tests prohibited the atmospheric, outer space, and underwater, and the comprehensive test ban treaty prohibited all nuclear testing. Obviously, nuclear testing have always been part and parcel of the non-proliferation regime. It's even in the preamble of the Non-Proliferation Treaty on Nuclear Weapons and many other resolutions and treaties.
Right, I see. So there has been many efforts made, but I'd like to specifically focus on the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which was established in 1996, and of course the CTBTO, which was tasked with building the verification regime of the CTBT, was established as well. Now, Professor Kim, could you give us more details about this treaty?
Yes, CTBT is the multilateral treaty to ban all nuclear explosion tests for military or peaceful purpose, as Director Sokova explained. It was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly, signed in 1996, and about the 178 states ratified, but 8 countries signed but not ratified, including China, North Korea, and the U.S. CTBTO is to conduct CTBT, an international organization for verification when there is a nuclear test. CTBTO has an international monitoring system we call IMO, and communication infrastructure, and international data center, and conduct on-site inspection as well. So IMS include the 179 seismic monitoring station and 11 hydroacoustic station and the 16 infrasound station, as well as the 80 radio nuclide station and 16 radio nuclear laboratory as well.
Right, I see. Now, Director Sokova, as our Professor Kim already mentioned, the U.S. and China are the countries that have signed the treaty but have yet to ratify it. And thus, many experts say that this treaty is in operation but not in force. Even with such cases, what progress could we say that CTBT has accomplished so far, and what significance does signing and ratifying such a treaty have?
Right, as was already mentioned, that there are still 8 countries without their full signature and ratification of the treaty. The treaty cannot enter into force. There is a specific provision in the treaty called Annex 2 countries. Until all of them join the treaty formally, then the treaty continues to be not in force. Having said that, the fact that 186 countries have already signed the treaty and 176 ratified it, one of the strongest part of the treaty and the regime it established is that it's established a norm against nuclear testing. As to a certain degree, it's a taboo on nuclear testing. When we speak about nuclear taboo, mostly people think about the use of nuclear weapons. But the CTBT also established a norm against nuclear testing. And the longer the treaty, the norm is not violated, the stronger the norm becomes. The only country that actually tested since 2000 is North Korea. And it is an outlier in this respect. For any other country, if it wants to resume testing, the political costs would be enormous of doing that. So fortunately for other countries, the moratoria or self-imposed moratoria still works. The significance of non-nuclear testing also helps to strengthen overall nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime and efforts. The absence of nuclear testing prevents countries from developing new warheads that where scientists would be probably uncomfortable with using non-tested designs of nuclear warheads. So to a certain degree, the treaty, even though it's not enforced, still prevents horizontal and vertical proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Right, I see. So this treaty is significant in that it established norms against nuclear testing. But Professor Kim, there still have been 12 tests since 1996, and I'd like to ask you the more details of these tests.
Yes, unfortunately, there has been some test, after CTBT signed in 1996. Scholar experts call this group as a second nuclear age. The first nuclear age is conducted by the US, Russia, China, UK, and France. So these countries, India, conducted a test in 1998, and Pakistan also conducted a test in 1998. And then the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, so-called North Korea, conducted nuclear tests, as we already know, 2006, 2009, 2013, 16, and finally 17. So different countries have a different reason and motivation to conduct this kind of test. And North Korea nuclear test is the latest one. And international problem now and causing instability worldwide. The United Nations did a sanction, but North Korea never stopped their nuclear test. And scholar experts are very concerned about this one. And this is how we call the second nuclear age now.
Right, I see. We are going to talk about those countries later on, but before that, Director Sakova, I'd like to focus on North Korea. So North Korea is the only country that has conducted a nuclear test since 2000, and there's still a high possibility that Pyongyang will go ahead with the 7th one. Under what conditions or timing do you believe North Korea would go through with it?
Well, there are probably two types of issues that we're looking at. One is the technical side of conducting nuclear tests. If North Korea believes that, or it develops new types of warheads, it may think that it needs to test. Because testing is the verification of the workability of a nuclear warhead. In principle, it conducted 6 tests, and the last test, as far as I understand, we think that it was a weapon that used both HEU and plutonium in it. Having said that, if it does feel that it needs to test to improve its nuclear warheads and arsenal, it is possible that it will resume nuclear testing. The other side of the issue is political, where a country could decide that it wants to conduct a nuclear test by sending a signal to either the US or other countries that it is prepared to sort of up the ante of the threats or raise the escalation. From what I see, I'm not a kind of satellite imagery analyst myself, but I rely quite a lot on the work of other organizations that use satellite imagery analysis to assess the preparedness and activities around the North Korea's nuclear testing site. And so far, their assessment is that there have been some activities, but they're lower level activities that do not point out to a preparation for a nuclear test. So with some of these uncertainties, at least we could probably detect preparations if a nuclear test, if North Korea decides that it needs to test. nuclear weapons.
Right. So though we'd have to wait and see, North Korea could feel the need to go ahead with the seventh test for either a technical reason or a political reason behind. Now, Professor Kim, staying on North Korea front, when visiting South Korea, the CTBTO chief advised North Korea that it should take a small step in committing to not proceeding with the seventh nuclear test in order to build some bridges of trust and confidence with other countries. How do you see this view?
Yeah, CTBTO is an international organization for banning nuclear tests and its verification regime. So CTBTO is always advised diverse negotiation tool and confidence building measure. Confidence building measure is a key element of CTBT. So that's why CTBT or chief always advise on that. Every time CTBTO chief visits South Korea, I always arrange some meeting at the National Assembly with him. And diverse measure, we had a discussion on that and conducted for confidence building, just like the Republic of Korea now is want to have an audacious initiative with North Korea, open for any negotiation tool with North Korea without any precondition, and the U.S. government as well. So this kind of a confidence building measure is the right way for having denuclearization of North Korea in banning another 7 nuclear tests. And confidence building measure maybe could include the hotline or early sharing information or arms control and negotiation process. So all of the confidence building measure as always the CTBTO chief advice, and this is a right direction.
Right, I see. Now, let's turn our focus on China, Director Sukova. So China is also one of those countries increasing its nuclear weapons stockpile. And some say Beijing has no other choice but to do that to increase its nuclear warheads. Is this really so?
Well, if you look at the arsenals of the major nuclear powers, the United States and the Russian Federation still possess a much larger arsenals. And between the two of them, they account for 85% of the global nuclear weapons arsenal. China, in this respect, has a much lower arsenal of nuclear warheads. For example, the United States and Russia each have over 5,000 nuclear warheads. Estimates of China's arsenal put it at around a little bit above 400 warheads. However, there are also estimates by the U.S. Pentagon that China by 2030 may increase its arsenal to more than 1,000 nuclear warheads. So we do see a pretty rapid growth of the arsenal in China. The United States tried to engage China in arms control, but it looks like China feels that its nuclear arsenal is really incomparable with those of the United States and Russia. Well, with Russia, it's a different story relationship, but it is difficult to predict exactly how the build-up will grow and how fast and what are the specific numbers, because China is also one of the countries that is extremely intransparent in terms of its nuclear arsenals and number of warheads and missiles. We know from the US and Russia, because they had bilateral treaties, arms control treaties, where they reported the number of the warheads. So with China, we do see the growth of nuclear arsenals and lack of transparency at top of it. But if a country feels that it needs to build up a nuclear arsenal before it can sit down and negotiate, unfortunately, without any legal instruments or agreements, it's very difficult to prevent it.
Right, I see. Well, Director Sokoba, one more question. The war in Ukraine is also intensifying fear of nuclear war more than ever before, and some say that NATO's weapon support for Ukraine might increase Russia's nuclear threat. Do you agree with this?
I would agree with one thing, that the threat and risks of use of nuclear weapons certainly went dramatically up since the start of the war and Russian aggression in Ukraine, particularly because of some of the threats that were made and continue to be made by Russia. However, it is also demonstrated that there are limitations on what nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence could do. If we look at the history of the supply of different types of weapons to Ukraine, at the beginning of the war, there were concerns even about supplying some of the HIMARS and other weapons. Now we see the supply of much more advanced weapons, including F-16 airplanes. So it does demonstrate that on one hand, deterrence works, and NATO and the US avoided to get into a direct kinetic impact with Russia. But on the other hand, it also demonstrated the limits of nuclear deterrence. And as the red lines, or perceived red lines, keep moving, and the more weaponry, more advanced weaponry is provided to Ukraine, I think that we are seeing even more the limitations of deterrence. And at this point, even though the risk is still high, but I think the risk of escalation to nuclear level is really starting to be part of the picture when we, hopefully we won't come to it, have a situation where the Russian Federation and NATO troops or countries are engaged directly.
I see your point. Now, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask our Professor Kim this question. The increase in the number of nuclear warheads is, of course, an issue that needs to be dealt with, but experts point out that the modernization of nuclear-related technology is a much bigger issue. Do you agree with this? And to make the world safe from nuclear threats, what should be first done?
Yeah, nuclear modernization is the main concern of the international community. Nuclear weapon states, just like China, is a problem, and also as well as the emerging nuclear state that we call nuclear armed state, including India, Pakistan, and North Korea, as a main problem of this one. Now it's the North Korea focus on the tactical nuclear weapons and miniaturization of their nuclear warhead with the short and middle range missiles. So this causes international concern and regional instability for another nuclear war. So international community try to minimize the nuclear warhead at the same time, no first nuclear use doctrine, and fundamentally in the end no nuclear zone like the regional nuclear free zone and TPNW. So this is an international community effort, and then South Korea and other international community try to ban another 7 nuclear weapon tests.
Right, I see. Hope we could go toward the nuclear safe world marking this day. I'd like to ask many more questions, but unfortunately this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Director Sokoba and Professor Kim, for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
I'm live! 저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지 텐션 같은데 아무도 안 하는 거고.